Imagine this, a former British king standing in Nazi Germany giving the infamous Nazi salute and meeting Adolf Hitler. Now what if I told you that the same man was also accused of leaking Allied war plans to the Germans? Well, this is the story of Edward VIII, the king who abdicated the throne for love, and he was entangled in the darkest conspiracies of the 20th century. In this video we're going to explore two critical questions. 1. Why did Edward abdicate the throne after less than a year? 2. Was Edward VIII truly a Nazi sympathizer? Let's dive into the life of the king whose choices cast a dark shadow over the British royal family. Let's start with question number 1. Edward's dramatic abdication didn't happen overnight. His relationship with Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American socialite, began in the 1930s and quickly developed into a full-blown scandal in 1934. While his then mistress Lady Thelma Furness was away, Wallis allegedly became Edward's new lover, and by the end of the year, Edward was slavishly dependent on her, according to his biographer. But this was more than just an affair. Wallis was known for being super domineering and being very manipulative, and it worked on Edward, and his dad was not happy about that. King George V was outraged of the thought of Wallis joining the royal circle. As Edward's obsession with Wallis grew, it began to interfere with his royal duties. He showered her with extravagant gifts, including expensive jewelry, and took her on vacations to Europe.
Is it your wishes or my wishes?
Everyone around him was alarmed, not only for the fact that he was ignoring his royal duties, also because Wallis was twice divorced, something that was very taboo back in the day. Edward's dad died and became king. Many were hoping for Edward to move and find a suitable wife, but that wasn't the case. Edward was determined to marry Wallis, even though the British government didn't agree, the people of England didn't agree, and the Church of England didn't agree. And the church is probably the most important one, as the church and the royal family are quite linked, and the church would not accept a woman that is twice divorced, plus both her husbands are still alive. Unable to let go of Wallis and prioritize his duty, he decided to abdicate the throne in December 1936.
But you must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do, without the help and support of the woman I love.
Edward's brother George VI got crowned as the new King of England on December 11, 1936. Many thought that Edward and Wallis would live a quiet life now, but that wasn't the case. Now let's get into question number 2. In October 1937, less than a year after his abdication, Edward and Wallis made a highly controversial visit to Adolf Hitler at his retreat in Berghof, Bavaria. The visit was wildly publicized by the German media, and photos of Edward giving full Nazi salutes shocked the world. But the big question is, why would Edward associate himself with the Nazi regime? According to Albert von Mensdorff, the former Austrian ambassador, Edward initially viewed German fascism as a war against communism. The Duke's experience during World War I, where he witnessed the horrors of war firsthand, made him a strong advocate for peace. He believed that avoiding another war with Germany was crucial, even if it meant befriending Hitler. Albert Speer, one of Hitler's closest advisors, quoted Hitler saying, "If Edward had stayed, everything would have been different. His abdication was a severe loss for us." Edward's controversial actions didn't end with his visit to Nazi Germany. In February 1940, Julius von Zech-Burgersoda, I know I'm butchering that name, but he was a German ambassador in The Hague. He claimed that Edward was leaking Allied defense plans for Belgium to the Nazis. If these accusations were true, that would be treason. Edward obviously denied it, but till this day we don't know for sure, but the damage to his reputation was done. As the war progressed, Edward and his wife fled to Portugal in 1940. And what happens now, it might be one of the craziest parts of this whole story, and I know that's a big thing to say, as many crazy things have happened already in this video. But he became the target of Operation Willy. Operation Willy was a Nazi plot to kidnap the former British king so they could create a puppet state that is basically controlled by the Nazi government. And well, Winston Churchill jumped in. I think he found out about the operation, but besides that, he was already quite fearful of Edward. He was quite fearful of the fact that he was leaning towards the Nazi ideology. So he sent the Duke to the Bahamas. So Edward became the governor of the Bahamas in the middle of nowhere where the Nazis couldn't find him. Plus, in the Bahamas, he couldn't cause any trouble. So effectively kind of sending him to isolation. And that was the end of Edward. He stayed in the Bahamas until the end of the war. But even after the war, his Nazi loyalty haunted him. And back in the 1950s, a document got leaked. The document was known as the Marburg Files, and it revealed sensitive communications between Edward and Nazi officials. Although Edward denied being pro-Nazi, he did admit that he admired the Germans. In his memoirs, he wrote that he found Hitler to be a ridiculous figure. However, in private, he was reported to have said, "I never thought Hitler was such a bad chap." That's a funny way of describing Hitler. The Duke and Duchess spent the remainder of their lives in relative isolation in France, but their relationship with Nazi Germany left a permanent stain on Edward's legacy. Many historians believe that had he had remained king, his connection to Hitler and his appeasement policies might have had devastating consequences for Britain. So was Edward VIII truly a Nazi sympathizer, or was he a man making poor choices in a turbulent time? And was his abdication really because of true love, or was he just too lazy to follow up on his duties as king? These are questions that we won't ever probably know the answer of. One thing is clear: thank God that Edward VIII wasn't king for longer than a year. And thank God he wasn't king during World War II. If you enjoyed this video, then I recommend you watching this one. I want to thank you all for watching. Please subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one.